You're listening to Word on the Reef, diving into marine science on the Great Barrier Reef and beyond, with Tanya Murphy and Brett Goodban. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Word on the Reef. I'm your host, diver and marine conservationist Tanya Murphy. And joining me, as always, is Cairns Aquarium's marine educator and fish whisperer, Brett Goodban.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We got a great episode today.
Before we dive in, though, just a quick reef news update, and unfortunately it is concerning news. The Great Barrier Reef is at very high risk of extreme and widespread bleaching next summer, linked to this year's El Nino weather phenomenon. Professor Morgan Pratchett, a marine conservation ecologist at James Cook University, whom we had on our show back in March, told the International Coral Reef Symposium in Auckland, New Zealand last week that the extreme El Nino posed a significant concern. Quote, "It's a very high likelihood that we'll see very high severity and large-scale mass bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef," Professor Pratchett said. It's very concerning, but it is a few months away, so all we can do is hope that there's a change in those predictions. And also right now the reef needs action from us, not despair. We know the reef is resilient and we have technology to do things like restoration projects, but addressing climate change is the only real long-term solution. So for everyone who hears this, if you haven't already, please consider joining or supporting a climate action group. And let's keep the pressure on our Environment Minister, Murray Watt, to reject the multiple climate-wrecking fossil fuel proposals that are currently on his desk right now. But now on to today's topic.
Oh, yeah.
Today we're talking about one of the ocean's deadliest killers. It's responsible for the deaths of thousands of marine animals along Australia's east coast, including turtles, whales, dolphins, rays, and dugongs. No, I'm not talking about sharks. I'm talking about shark nets and baited drumlines deployed by the Queensland and New South Wales governments. Hundreds of these devices are installed along Australia's east coast, including within the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park and at Cairns. Governments say they're there to protect popular swimming beaches from 7 shark species considered dangerous to humans. But it's not just those sharks that become entangled. Since 2001, Queensland's shark control program has caught 413 whales and dolphins, 907 turtles, 1,766 rays, and more than 13,000 sharks, including harmless and threatened species of shark. The picture is just as concerning in New South Wales. Over the past 90 years, the state's shark nets and drumlines have killed more than 15,000 non-target marine animals. So how effective are these programs at protecting swimmers? Is shark culling supported by the evidence? And what alternatives are available that can keep both people and marine life safe? Here to help answer some of these questions is shark scientist Dr. Leonardo Guida, Shark Campaign Manager with the Australian Marine Conservation Society. Good morning, Dr. Guida, and welcome to Word on the Reef.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on, Tanya and Brett.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for coming, buddy.
It's great to have you on the show. To start with, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your origins and how you first became interested in sharks and rays?
My earliest memories are when I was a kid and I used to, Dad used to have National Geographic magazines with that famous yellow cover. And I remember just trawling through them as a kid, just looking at animals like most kids do. And I just always gravitated towards the great white shark. And even though I probably shouldn't have watched it at such a young age, I saw the film Jaws, scared me to bits. But at the same time, that fear was deeply fascinating. And I wanted to know why I felt that way and what was this animal and what did it do. Anyway, I've always had a love of science, and so I was fortunate enough to go through university and marry the two, where I was able to do my PhD looking at the effects of commercial fishing on shark and ray populations in Australia, specifically how stressed out they get when they get caught, what that means for their survival, their behaviour, and also their reproduction. And I did that at Monash University down in Victoria, and then come 2018, I was extremely fortunate to get a job at essentially exactly what I studied.
Yep.
And that was with AMCS, the Australian Marine Conservation Society, up in Brisbane. So I moved up to Brisbane in 2018 to lead the shark conservation work. And yeah, so familiar with Queensland, familiar with what goes on there. And then in 2023, moved down to Sydney to be with my now partner and 1-year-old son. And as we've probably all heard of this year, there are a spate of shark bites here in New South Wales.
Yes.
So I seem to be in and amongst it wherever I go. But yeah, I do what I can to improve public education, information, and advocate for what robust science says or recommends we should do with respect to conserving the ocean, utilising our resources sustainably, so with respect to commercial fishing,
Yep.
and live alongside a healthy ocean into the future for future generations as well.
A lot of people don't have a lot of sympathy for sharks. In fact, many people are terrified of them. So why are sharks important and why do we need to protect them?
Yeah. So look, first thing, that fear is completely normal.
Yep.
That fear is an evolutionary response we have. It's what's kept us alive. It's what's allowed humans to exist on this planet for the better part of a few 100,000 years. And simply, humans aren't built to be in the ocean. So it's not surprising that a lot of people, not just scared of sharks, but sometimes the ocean in general. My brothers refuse to go in water deeper than their knees. So that fear is normal.
Mm-hmm.
It should be respected. But where it gets to the point where it leads us to make bad decisions, bad policies, is when we let that fear override a sense of rational judgment and what the evidence is before us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's how I structure my shark shows at work, is the first question I ask people is, please put your hand up if you're afraid of sharks. Mm-hmm. And then I say the same thing. That's okay. It's okay to fear them, but we also need to understand how important their role is and how important they are to the planet and learn how to navigate living with them so that we can protect them. And people respect that.
Yeah. So why are sharks important?
The simplest answer to that question is the food web. They keep it in balance and in check. And if we remove too many sharks from that food web, because they form that keystone role that's so important for everything else, those food webs can potentially become unstable and, worse still, possibly even collapse.
That's right.
But sharks do more than just eat things in a food web. They can influence the behaviour of animals around them. And it's what ecologists have coined the landscape of fear. And by that, particularly in like coral reef ecosystems, you get smaller fish that when a shark comes nearby, they then hide away into their coral retreats, or they reduce their foraging activity. And by reducing foraging activity, it puts less pressure on other organisms and invertebrates. And they've done some studies out in WA around shark bays. Tiger sharks eat sea turtles and dugongs on their toes, as it were. So if a sea turtle or a dugong is happily munching away, the moment there's an indication that there's a tiger shark in the area, those animals will then stop eating, and their priority is to avoid being eaten themselves, and so they'll move off and move around.
Yep.
And what that does is it prevents overgrazing of seagrass in any one spot. So you get these mosaics of seagrass, healthy seagrass communities. And the sharks are also indirectly protecting the little guys, because those seagrass communities are really important nurseries, not just for invertebrates, but for small fish as well.
Yep.
And then to throw it one step further, seagrass is an absolute powerhouse of a carbon store. From memory, it draws down carbon at 40 times the rate of tropical rainforests, and it can store carbon for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah.
And so in that respect there, we can also look at sharks as climate champions. So they don't just go around and eat things. They can influence the behaviour of other animals around them, and as a consequence, that can then shape, quite literally, the very physical ecosystem there as well.
Yeah, there was this famous example of the role of apex predators that went around on social media a few years ago, which was about removing wolves from Yellowstone National Park, I think, and it had a complete flow-on effect to absolutely everything else in the park, so they had to bring the wolves back.
The general concept is rewilding, and it's the idea that, you know, if you reintroduce these keystone animals into ecosystems, one thing leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to another, and you're kind of restoring what was. It works in theory, but in practice it can be quite challenging. The goal is to not get to that point in the first place. And so we're very fortunate in Australia that we've got the resources. Politically speaking, we're relatively stable compared to a lot of countries in the world. We've got, as I said, we've got the resources, we've got the intellectual talent, the capacity, the technology to ensure that our oceans are healthy into the future. So, hopefully we don't get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's sharks or lions on the African savannah, these are animals, predators that have been there for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions of years. So we can't simply just go and wipe off anything off the planet without it having a flow-on effect.
It's a bit naive to think that we can just stick our beak in and go, hey, you guys need to do this. They're like, hang on, champ, we've been around a lot longer than you. We know what we're doing.
Yeah, but when it comes to sharks, they're older than the first tree that ever sprouted on Earth.
And the rings of Saturn and us.
They've been around about 450 million years.
Yep.
They've survived all 5 of the Earth's mass extinction events.
Yep.
But what's really alarming is that there's a very genuine fear that they might not survive us. And in the past 100 or so years of industrialised fishing globally, they face an extinction rate of 30-odd% of their species. And in Australia, whilst we're relatively good in terms of shark populations and species compared to the rest of the world, the bar's pretty low. And even in our own waters, roughly 1 in 8 shark and ray species are threatened with extinction to varying degrees.
Yeah.
And when you kind of realise that we still can legally fish some endangered shark species from our waters and then sell them on for consumption, that's when you go, hold on, we've got some serious problems in our backyard and we really need to look at what we're doing.
There are 331 species of sharks and rays, their relatives, in Australia, and nearly half of them are endemic, which means they're found nowhere else. So what are some of your favourite shark species and what's remarkable about them? Because I think a lot of people who aren't ocean going just sort of think of the word shark and they just see a terrifying great white shark. But they're so diverse, aren't they, Dr. Guida?
Yeah, incredibly diverse in terms of size. They can range from as small as around about 60 to 80 centimetre lantern sharks that live in the deep, dark depths of the Coral Sea, right up to a whale shark, the world's largest fish, which can get up to, from memory, possibly up to 18 metres. So pretty huge.
Yep.
Yeah, and both of those are examples of sharks that are completely harmless. The whale shark is the largest one and it only eats plankton.
Yep.
Yeah, so and that's just in size. And then you can look at diversity in terms of where they live. You've obviously got your coastal species, your open ocean species like the oceanic whitetips. And then you've got deep sea species, as I mentioned, like the lantern shark or even a green-eyed spur dog, which lives at a little over 1,200 metres below the waves.
I love that name, the green-eyed spur dog.
Yeah, I know, that's awesome. If you're going to come back as a shark, you'd pick that one, wouldn't you?
Probably, yeah. So, and that's in depth. And then, again, the diversity is crazy in terms of their biology. They generally mature quite late in life. On average, and as I said, it's quite diverse, but on average, 10 years they reach maturity, 2 to 3 year reproductive cycle, giving birth to 4 to 6 young. But that, again, that's the average. The extremes, you can have gummy sharks, as I mentioned earlier, which are quite productive, and they'll breed every year and pup about 30 pups, and they'll mature at about 6 years old, females, that is. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum where you've got dusky sharks that are about 18 to 20-odd years old by the time they mature. Wow,
they're really slow to reproduce.
Yeah, they've got pregnancies for nearly 2 years, and they take a year off just to recover. There's only a handful of pups born. And as I said, there's everything else in between. So when we look at that and then we look at the impacts on sharks, primarily fishing impacts, you can see how it's quite easy to essentially take them quicker than they can replace themselves.
Sharks can grow really old as well. I don't know whether we have those species in Australia, but I remember reading about Greenland sharks that can live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, they're estimated about 400 years old.
Wow.
So that predates colonisation of Australia by
200 years.
200 years.
Jeez, imagine if he could talk, eh? Imagine the things that 400-year-old shark could tell us.
Yeah, and their metabolism's so slow.
Wow.
Which is also why they live so long, because they live in such cold water.
Yeah.
That, I think from memory, basically in terms of energy requirements, it's something literally like an apple a day, because their metabolism is so slow.
So that's another one that's not very dangerous then, because they don't need to eat very much, because they don't move very fast.
Yeah, we haven't actually got to any yet that are a problem to humans, so they think.
So there's quite a lot. And in terms of my favourites, I mean, as I touched on earlier, as a kid, it was a great white shark.
Yeah, that's my boss
Pretty
too.
obvious. But as I've had more and more experience working in this area, southern fiddler rays are very, very dear to my heart. They're an endemic species, southern parts of Australia. And during my research, I looked after several pregnant fiddler rays in tanks and watched them give birth and release their young. So it's got a very, very special part of me, the southern fiddler rays. And then there's other cool ones like the white-fin swell shark, which I've only ever seen it in a specimen jar, tragically. And this is a species that the best estimates is critically endangered. Again, endemic, lives at about 500 metres below the waves. And like its other swell shark cousins that live in more coastal waters, it'll swallow water to make itself inflate and look bigger to any potential threats.
That's a good party trick.
Swell shark. Yeah, it's pretty neat
Swell
party
shark.
trick. But yeah, the more common versions of that species, again, down near where I grew up in Victoria, like a draft board shark. Quite gnarly looking sharks. They only get to about a metre or so long. And yeah, they'll swallow water up, and I've literally pulled them up on deck and they'll just spit all this water out. So it's pretty funny. They're pretty hardy. They can handle a beating. So when they do get caught, they can handle air exposure for like 30, 40 minutes. And this is all done through work in simulation as well, in tanks and aquaria. And yeah, they've got a really good post-release survival rate just because they're such hardy animals.
Yeah.
But again, the other end of the spectrum, you've got hammerheads, which the joke is, they see a hook and die because they're just so sensitive to...
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're strung out.
And
it doesn't take much.
No.
I just Googled a picture of the swell shark, and there's a picture of one that's all swelled up. And yeah, I guess it's kind of like a puffer fish. They swell themselves up to look bigger and deter predators as well.
Okay,
But
yeah, it's kinda cute.
I never knew that a shark could do that as well. That's remarkable.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. And you've obviously got the famous epaulet shark out there on the reef.
I
Yeah,
love
they're.
those.
I've got eppies.
Reef pool.
4 eppies at work. They're so
adorable.
cool. But my soft spot, my favourite is obviously great whites because that's what I've grew up with.
Oh, you don't have any of those at the Cairns
We
Aquarium?
don't have any of those. Thank God no aquariums have them.
No
But
one's successfully kept them alive in
they're
captivity.
no. But my soft spot is definitely our 2 leopard sharks, Rosie and Cleo, who are in the process of laying more eggs at the moment. It's like a Steggles factory.
So for any listener who isn't familiar, an epaulet shark is a small, sort of long, thin shark which has spots. It's brown with spots. They look like puppy dogs. They're
so cute.
Utterly harmless.
Yep.
I think they eat crustaceans or something. They're really adorable.
And they walk across the top of the reef at low tide helping themselves. They walk like a dog. And they can survive nearly an hour walking around the top, as long as there's a bit of water there. But it's the idea of those 2 big black dots. I reckon that's to terrify seagulls, because they look down and look at those dots and go, man, that thing's huge.
Yeah.
I'm not going near that. Meanwhile, the epaulet shark's just wandering around doing his own thing.
Yeah.
Which is actually why they're called epaulet sharks, isn't it? Because they're like the epaulets on a captain's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're so cool.
Oh, and leopard sharks.
I love my leopard sharks.
They're adorable as well. I mean,
Yeah.
the name, for anyone who's not familiar, might make them sound like a apex predator, but to humans, they're harmless, aren't they? They've got a sort of a mouth that seems to face down. What do they eat, the leopard sharks?
They're just small fish and crustaceans.
Yeah, we feed them squid and fish and prawns and all sorts of stuff. But
What,
they
you don't
are...
feed them? You don't feed them guests at the aquarium?
No, we don't want to feed them those.
You don't have many people putting their hands up?
No.
Who wants to join in for the first person perspective of the fish feed?
No, my sharks would just go, ooh,
Yuck.
ooh, get them away from me.
Ooh. Too many microplastics in this human.
But we've had a couple of parthenogenesis babies from our leopard sharks in there too. No sperm required.
For any listeners who don't know what parthenogenesis means,
pretty cool.
Can you say what it means, Brett?
Yeah, so they can have the ability to have a offspring without sperm present. So reptiles and insects do it. But the issue with it
No
is
men required.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that all parthenogenesis babies in sharks are all female. So they do need diversity. They need to be able to find sperm out there and find males and have a bit of both. But
Makes sense.
Yeah, if they
They're
don't have
missing a
sperm,
chromosome.
then all the holes in the Swiss cheese line up and bang, you've got a female version of the species. That's not a clone though. Yeah, it's
Wow.
pretty cool. How could
Wow.
you not like sharks? Seriously.
Yeah, leopard sharks are just so adorable. They, as the name suggests, for anyone who's not familiar, they're
Yeah, look
sort
it
of
up.
brown with spots,
Yep.
and their fins are round.
They're so cute.
Instead of having sharp, pointy fins, they
Yep.
have round fins, which just enhances the
Haven't
look
they been
of
voted as being
cuteness.
the cutest shark on the planet? They're so
well,
beautiful.
You see videos online of aquarium divers giving them a belly rub.
Yeah,
and they
ours
rub
need
up
cuddles.
against you.
They need cuddles during feeding, otherwise they get upset.
Very affectionate. So I love to describe to people sharks as just being like dogs. I mean, if you think about all the different breeds of dogs, you've got your tiny little harmless lap dogs, and then obviously it ranges up to the bigger,
Great Danes,
more scary dogs. And, you know, sharks are the same. You can't taint them all as being dangerous because they range from the small, cuddly ones to the large, dangerous ones.
Well, there is a dog shark.
Yeah. And there's a spur dog.
There is, yes.
Sorry, Leo. We
go off. We do this. We go off on a tangent.
So many movies and media reports depict sharks as mindless killing machines. How much does this perception reflect reality, and how much of a threat do sharks really pose to humans?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a lot of people, I'm sure, would be familiar with the Jaws effect. That being that since the film Jaws, you know, people all of a sudden went, oh my God, there's this animal out there that wants to hunt us down and kill us all. And then, the media, I mean, there's that phrase, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. But I think the tide is turning, albeit incrementally, but I think probably in the last, maybe, I'd like to say at least 5 to 10 years, I think the reporting on sharks has been a lot more considered. You obviously still get the sensationalist stories and everything like that, the sensationalist language, but people are becoming more and more considered about how they talk about sharks. And the kind of stories that are told. So the good thing about social media is that people are starting to see more and more images and footages of sharks just doing their thing and not really bothering anyone and just looking awesome in these amazing coastal sceneries or at sea. And people are now seeing the other side of the coin, whereas traditionally, if ever you saw a shark, be it a picture or a film, it was always that classic great white jaws wide open. And that was the only thing that would come to mind.
Well, I can add a little bit of weight very quickly to that because I get to see it from a customer point of view. Now, I've been doing those shark shows at the aquarium now for 9 years. Nearly 3 million people have been through that place. And I've seen, from a customer point of view, I've seen a seismic shift from when I first used to do the shark shows to people just either getting up and walking out or shaking their head in the show going, oh, they're all monsters, to now having 110 people still seated at the end listening to the conservation part. Wow. And most of them are saying, thank you for giving us the real story. Education leads to conservation, and people just want to know the real story. So just to add a bit of positivity to what you said, then from a customer point of view, it's changed.
Yes. When I've been working on the tourism dive and snorkel boats on the Great Barrier Reef for many years, you always ask the room, who wants to see a shark while we're out there snorkeling today? And it's divided. Some people are like, yes, which is good to see. And some people are like, no. And I'm like, well, if you don't want to see one, you're in luck because we barely ever see them, unfortunately, since they're so endangered. But if you do see them, what we're going to see on the shallows of the Great Barrier Reef coral snorkeling area are your small reef sharks, which are smaller than us. They're smaller than a human. They're afraid of us. And when they see us, they're just going to swim off. So you're going to need to take a photo real fast, otherwise you'll blink and you'll miss it. So and for me, having worked and dived on the Great Barrier Reef since 2011, not once have I had a scary shark come up to me. It's usually been me chasing the sharks.
Yeah, that's the other way around. The sharks have been at the meeting going, here comes Tanya again.
Yeah, but Brett, you've had a tiger shark swim past you and it wasn't the slightest bit interested in eating you.
No, so I was very privileged back in the day. So I used to work on a dive boat called Taka that used to go up to North Horn, the Northern Coral Sea. And back then I was doing all the filming of the shark feeds and all that sort of stuff. So, but my interaction with sharks started when I was little because I grew up on the south coast of WA, so we used to dive with great whites all the time and surf with them. So I just fell in love with them. But I had a massive tiger shark come into the feed one day and she was about 4 metres. She was huge, the biggest tiger shark I've ever seen. And she came up from the bottom and she looked at all the other sharks feeding. There's a couple of hammerheads, oceanic silvertips, a lot all going crazy. And she just came up and she gave them all the death stare and she just looked straight at me and swam past and disappeared. And I had that moment of, how cool is this, after I got my breath back. But, it's just,
Jaws had the fiction that the shark is actually vindictive. It's going to chase you down to get revenge upon you. But the reality is they prefer sushi. Sharks prefer sushi.
That's right.
But every time that there's been an attack, it's usually because there was sushi involved.
Yeah, it's a tricky one to kind of communicate to people.
It is.
As I said, particularly recently, particularly in New South Wales, where you had a spate of bites in the space of 10 days and surfers and whatnot. And I've recently spoken to people who were either directly or indirectly affected by those bites. And the common question they ask is like, why? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And yeah, you're right. Like, most times it's a case of the shark's
mistaken identity.
Doesn't quite know exactly what it is, or
thinks you're a seal or a turtle.
Yeah,
you've unfortunately kind of gotten in the way of perhaps its actual prey. The shark itself might have felt defensive, again, because you're in the way, so to speak. Yeah, often there's no rhyme or reason as such, and unless you can actually pop inside the mind of a shark, which, let's be honest, none of us can, I suppose we'll never truly know. But from what the scientific research about behaviour and, you know, how they perceive shapes and vision in the water and smell and everything like that, there are instances of, as Tanya hinted at, you know, mistaken identity because of your silhouette.
And if people are fishing or gutting fish nearby, then that's obviously increases their confusion because they smell the fish blood.
Yeah.
And if you're spearfishing, then I think everyone who goes spearfishing understands the risk that they're taking.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I think a spearfisher that doesn't acknowledge the risk of a shark is probably someone that's never spearfished before.
And should take up golf instead.
Possibly, yeah. So, yeah, it's unfortunate and tragic to say the least, but more often than not, particularly with white sharks as well, like very, very curious animals, very intelligent animals. They don't have hands. They've got a mouthful of razor blades. And, you know, an exploratory bite, unfortunately and tragically, can sometimes be fatal.
Yeah.
And whether it's a fatal bite or not can be a matter of just real tragic bad luck and a couple of millimetres or a millimetre to the left or to the right of an artery.
Yeah, that's right.
So another thing is I saw a list of which animals are the most deadly to humans. And humans are one of them. We are killing each other at a much higher rate than sharks are. Mosquitoes, dogs.
1.9 million people last year, I think the Mozzie took out.
Apparently you're more likely to die from a coconut falling on your head or a vending machine falling on you.
Vending machines and garden snails too made it on the list last year. I don't know how that works.
Oh, no.
Yeah, there's a few out there, but
I've got a few more bones to pick about the media. In our local paper a few years ago, there's a local girl who I'm acquainted with that was very unlucky to get bitten on the ankle by a shark.
Oh, yes, I had her at work.
Yeah, she obviously, it wasn't a very big shark because she made a recovery. She didn't lose her foot, it just sort of bit her ankle. But the local newspaper, not having been there to take a photo of the actual shark, they put a stock photo of a giant great white shark next to the article.
She came in with her foot all strapped up in a wheelchair and she listened to my shark show. We had a really good chat afterwards.
Well, she's famous for shouting, "I still love sharks," to the media as she was wheeled out of the medical evacuation helicopter. We'll have to get her on the show at some point.
Absolutely.
I think Netflix, like, you still have shows on there, like dramas about sharks that are horror films, but you've also got a lot of documentaries about the freedivers that freedive with tiger sharks and the
Ocean Ramsey.
All the Sharks, which is sort of promoting the excitement of diving with sharks. I've got to race ahead because we've done what we usually do and eaten up half our show.
We've gone off on a tangent.
But I want to talk about threats to sharks. So let's reverse the question. We've talked a lot about how much of a threat sharks are to humans, but how much of a threat are humans to sharks, Leo?
We're their single biggest threat.
Yep.
As I touched on earlier, you know, they survived the world's 5 mass extinction events, but they may very well not survive us. And just to recap in case anyone had missed it earlier, the world's been fishing industrially since the early 1900s. So in a little over 100 years, we've managed to put 37% of their species at risk of extinction. With the IUCN Red List, that's, from what I can recall, the highest form of any marine life at risk of extinction. And more recently, they've found that oceanic species have declined by 70% in the past 50 years globally. When we look at Australia and how we fish, we've got, as I touched on earlier, roughly around about 1 in 8 of our species are threatened with extinction. And the primary driver is commercial fishing in Australia and also globally. But there are also emerging threats coming through as we learn more. Recreational fishing to an extent, but again, it's by and large commercial fishing. Other impacts we have, and these are particularly for ray species and most famously sawfish, is where you have, particularly across northern Australia, the damming of rivers, the extraction of water from key watersheds. Freshwater sawfish, for example, are endangered. They live out in the coastal waters out at sea, but they come into the freshwater reaches of rivers and pup. And sawfish pups will live in the rivers and billabongs till they're about 5 or 6 years old, and they'll start making their way back out to sea when they're bigger adults. So if you're altering river flows and you're harvesting water and you're damming up rivers, you're choking off a lot of those really, really important habitats and migratory pathways for these animals to live their normal life. And that's another really big threat, particularly the sawfish. And then overlaying it all, you've got climate change. It's influencing where and when sharks move and for how long they move in certain areas. And that is going to affect perhaps whether they interact with a commercial fishery or not, but then also their biology, which we don't quite fully understand how climate change is affecting their biology with temperature changes in the water. But what we are seeing is their movement pattern changing and what that might mean for their habitat availability or their traditional hunting grounds.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've also got other fish species that will move and change their migratory patterns because of climate. And then there's that flow-on effect through the food web in terms of where's food available, when and how much.
You mentioned commercial fishing, and as a campaigner, you've done various campaigns to help protect sharks from fishing in Queensland. Can you tell us the commercial fishing threats that existed for sharks in Queensland and the protections that have been introduced across the past decade?
So zooming right out, the early 2000s is when Australia as a whole reached peak shark fishing. And since then, across Australia, in all jurisdictions, fishing rules and management have incrementally changed such that we're now better now in terms of how we fish than what we were then. We're by far from perfect and there's still a long way to go. But we have come a long way, and largely to the thanks of conservationists, community support, scientists and fishers who recognise that they're having an impact and that things need to change so that they have a healthy industry moving forward into the years ahead. When we look at Queensland specifically and more recently, we know that the commercial gill nets have largely been removed from the Great Barrier Reef and are due to be officially phased out by June next year from memory.
Yep.
Gill nets were a primary driver of overfishing just because of the nature of how they fish.
And that's bycatch, because gill nets weren't aiming to catch sharks, or were they?
No, they weren't. There's definitely gill net shark fishery. There's obviously the bycatch issue with threatened species, and I won't go into that so much, but I'll speak more about sharks. So with gill nets, for people who aren't familiar, they're a fishing net. And they're called a gill net because basically what happens is a fish swims through it, it gets caught in the gills, and as a consequence it can't move, and then they haul the nets up and there's the catch. Now, gill nets are used from the point of view that, we can select for the size of fish. So when we look at sharks, the idea is that if a shark's too small, it'll pass through the nets. If a shark's big, so it's a mature adult, it'll bounce off the net because the mesh is too small. But if a shark is the perfect size as per the fishing rules, it'll get caught. The theory being that you can kind of fish sharks at a level and at a size where you're not impacting the smaller ones growing up and you're not necessarily catching the larger ones that have to breed. However, there was overfishing going on, and this was largely because Queensland Fisheries since 2012 didn't have any independent monitoring. So basically you had to take logbooks of what they were written as, and essentially any threatened species that were caught, be they sharks or otherwise, were grossly underestimated. And so the veracity of that data was, you could question, to say the least. And obviously any decisions you make and any models you come up with are only as good as the data you've got. So yes, we'll talk about scalloped hammerheads. Now, scalloped hammerheads are endangered in Australian waters, critically endangered globally, and because of the nature of their head, doesn't matter what size they are, they're going to get caught in the net, just because of the head shape. And hammerheads don't last long at all in terms of their stress response. They die really quick. And so the nature of gill nets, they could be up to 1 kilometre long in the Great Barrier Reef, these nets, which is insane. The overfishing was happening, and when you have a look at the Great Barrier Reef report going back maybe 5 years or so, it was clearly identifying that overfishing was a problem, overfishing of predators in an ecosystem was a problem, and as we touched on earlier, there was a risk that it could have broader ecosystem impacts in terms of food webs. And so, realising that, the Queensland government, as part of their overall strategy to make their fisheries more sustainable, we've now seen that gill nets have been removed, phased out, and I'm involved in the Gulf Carpentaria fishery as well. Similar thing, gill nets still operate there, but some great decisions have been made where we've got some net-free zones out in the Gulf as well to protect threatened species, including sawfish. So, generally speaking, I would say over the past 5 years or so, Queensland's made some significant strides forward. But again, challenges still persist, and it'll be a case of working through those challenges to ensure that Queensland has healthy oceans and that we manage our fisheries also so that the broader ecosystem can be resilient when we consider the impact that climate change is having as well.
For anyone who's not aware, because I think if you ask the majority of Queenslanders, do you eat shark? Most people will be like, no.
No. Or what is shark?
But a lot of people wouldn't realise that maybe they have eaten shark by mistake, because when you go to the fish and chip shop, a lot of the time when you have fish and chips, it could have been shark meat, right? Because you just buy fish and chips. It just doesn't tell you what type of fish it is.
Some shops just go fish and chips, $15. And it's just literally fish and chips, and whatever the fish is, I'll eat it.
And that's also a bit of an issue too, because if people go into a fish and chip shop and they ask for fish, it's not actually listed as to what type of shark it is.
No, you're right. And we did a survey a few years ago, a national survey, and from what I can recall, I think it was 1 in 3 people don't realise that flake's even shark meat.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, as you said, flake's a generic term. It should only refer to 2 species of shark, and that being the gummy shark, which is more often found in the southern parts and the cooler waters of Australia, or the reef shark.
And I understand that you or other researchers had done DNA tests on fish and chips from different restaurants and found critically endangered scalloped hammerhead in fish and chip shops, and it wasn't labelled as such because it shouldn't be there in the first place.
The mislabels across Australia is done by Macquarie Uni. The mislabelling, off the top of my head, I think about 90-odd% of samples were mislabeled by species or general name, like flake and gummy shark. So it was either called flake and it wasn't gummy shark, or it was a species that it actually wasn't.
Yeah.
And amongst all that, green-eyed spur dog, funnily enough, was one of them. That was found out in a fish shop in Victoria. And that's an endangered species.
So what penalties?
You're technically allowed to catch green-eyed spur dog, but somehow it ended up in a fish shop.
Yeah.
And then, you had scalloped hammerhead in the mix and a few other species as well.
So I guess that's why you had a campaign called Give Flake a Break.
Yes, I use that in my show every day.
Yeah.
Give flake a break.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, because it's just to give it a break, because you don't know what species you're eating, and it could very well be an endangered species.
Yep.
But when we look at gummy sharks, in and of themselves, the way they're managed just for that species, the impact's not too bad.
Yeah, because they're fast replacing. They breed fast.
Yeah, however, when you start going, well, how are gummy shark caught? Well, they're caught with gill nets. What else does that gill net catch? That catches school shark throughout Victoria. School shark are an endangered species. School shark are currently being overfished. School shark are down to around about 12 to 15% of their original numbers. So gummy shark isn't sustainable when we start looking at broadly, what does it mean for the environment?
Yeah.
So basically, if you want to catch gummy shark with a gill net, it's coming at the expense of another species.
Right.
So you wouldn't call that sustainable.
No.
So you talked about how we now have extra protections for our sharks in Australia, but now there's some anxiety in the community about whether a rebound in shark numbers might pose an increased safety risk to swimmers. How much truth is there to that, and what's the real facts about shark numbers, especially on the east coast of Australia?
So it's true that shark bites in Australia are on the increase and have been on the increase, but this is most probably due to the fact that we've got an increasing population living on our coastlines and enjoying our beaches. So around about 90% of Australians live within an hour of the beach. And as we see the climate warming in particular, summer's getting hotter, winter's getting milder, more and more people are going to use the beach more and more often. And we're also seeing an increase in popularity in water sports. I'm sure you've seen an increase in popularity or interest in diving. There's definitely been an increasing interest in surfing and activities like surfing. So, in short, more and more people are spending more and more time and longer times in the water, which is going to, at least mathematically anyway, increase what is already a relatively low risk of shark interaction. When we look at shark numbers themselves, as I flagged earlier in our interview, sharks breed really, really slowly. And so if you have a look at Western Australia, for example, they had a look at a rough population assessment in their northwestern corner. And that's where there was some intense commercial shark fishing going on that only stopped in the early 2000s. And in the 15 years since it stopped, so when they had a look at these shark species and their catch trends and numbers in 2020, what they found was, with the exception of one species of shark, the sandbar shark, other species like duskies, hammerheads, milk sharks, silky sharks, at best their numbers had stabilised. And again, this is because they take several years to reach maturity. Again, 2 to 3 years reach reproductive bout, and they'll only give birth to a relatively few number of pups.
Okay, so the fact that fishing of sharks has reduced in the last 5 years in Queensland isn't going to result in a sudden explosion of shark numbers.
Yeah. So when we look at that gillnet ban and the removal of gillnets from Queensland's east coast, which accounted for about 90% of the fishing effort, and again, it was a shark fishery in parts and definitely did catch a lot of sharks. Yeah, in a couple of years, it's biologically impossible for numbers to quote unquote boom. Another example is in Northern Australia, right up until I think it was about the 1970s and even the 1980s, there was heavy overfishing from Taiwanese gillnet boats that were allowed into Australia to fish for shark. The fishing was so intense that ultimately that fishing stopped. And what they were predominantly fishing for were blacktip species. Now, blacktip reef sharks are kind of one of the more productive species. And it's taken, around about 30, 40 years within that time frame. Blacktip sharks or the blacktip species, those reef sharks, they're back at their estimated around about 90% of their original numbers. So even then, for a relatively productive shark, it can take decades to get back to really good levels. So yeah, when we look at the gillnet ban in Queensland, a couple of years is nowhere near enough to see significant recoveries. And even then, for a lot of the species, some of them are coming off relatively low baselines. So we have to keep that in mind as well if, in fact, they hopefully do recover.
A lot of people ask me, well, I feel like I'm seeing more sharks when I go fishing nowadays because they're coming in around my boat when I fish, they're taking the fish off the lines. But there's also been research showing that sharks have learned this behaviour to follow fishing boats. So it doesn't necessarily prove an increase in shark numbers. It proves an increase in their behaviour to follow fishing boats, I guess.
Yeah, look, there may very well be some species of shark, as I touched on earlier, the more productive, smaller-bodied species like your blacktip reef sharks that may, at least over the past 10, 20 years, may have shown some changes in their numbers and possibly upticks. But again, that's not all shark species, and generally speaking, there is a very, very strong body of research that shows, be it in a lab or out in the field, and even some really groundbreaking WA studies have shown that where you've got wreck fishing hotspots, where it's constant fishing, intense fishing, you've got hotspots of depredation. So that's the sharks coming in to take bites of fish off. It happens. Let's be honest, it happens, and it's an incredibly frustrating experience. I can appreciate that. Depredation is a real thing. But the way I like to explain it is that if I've got pizza and I'm walking down, say, your local street, and I yell out, free pizza, free pizza, free pizza, I might get a couple of people coming up to me on the first day going, what's this free pizza thing? Can I have a slice? And I'm like, yeah, sure, here, and have a slice. And if I keep doing that day after day, week after week, word's going to get around. And then eventually I'm going to be yelling out free pizza, and I'm going to have everyone swarm at me, and within minutes or seconds, all my pizza's going to be gone.
Yep.
I can't then say that because I've got so many people around me wanting free pizza that the population of Australia has boomed.
Yeah.
What's happened is that people have learned that there's free pizza going on, and from around the area, they've all come in and congregated. So on the one hand, you can appreciate a very real sense and a tangible sense that quite literally there are more sharks around me and more often. But zooming out, does that mean that any one given species is boomed in number? Probably not.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. And now I'm hungry for pizza, so thank you.
No worries.
Now, for 90 years, the Queensland and New South Wales governments have maintained what they call shark control programs aimed at protecting popular swimming beaches. These programs use equipment in the water to catch sharks, including inside the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park and at beaches near Cairns. Dr. Guida, can you explain what sort of equipment they're using to catch sharks and how they work and what impact they have on sharks?
So New South Wales and Queensland, as you touched on, for 90 years now have operated a shark culling program. In New South Wales, they exclusively use shark nets. So these are 160, 180 odd metres long, 4 to 6 metres in height. Sharks obviously hit them, get caught, tangled and drowned. In Queensland, there's a combination of nets, which are predominantly used in the southeast, so your Gold Coast and Sunny Coast areas, but it's also in combination with drum lines. And these are baited hooks that hang in the water with the intention to catch a shark And then assuming that shark is on the Queensland target list, of which there's 7 species, if it's alive, it gets shot dead. There are smart drum lines. These get utilised in New South Wales. The difference between a smart drum line and a conventional drum line is that the smart drum lines are designed such that when a shark bites it, it sends off a signal via satellite. The Fisheries Department go out to the shark, tag it and release it. And that usually happens on average about an hour of getting a signal. In Queensland, they call them catch alert drum lines. And these have been deployed within the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park because, as of quite a famous court case back in 2019, I think it was, Queensland was no longer allowed to cull sharks within the Great Barrier Marine Park. And as such, they're putting catch alert drum lines to catch and release the sharks.
Wow, it's an interesting workaround. They're still catching sharks inside a protected area, but they're going and releasing them.
Yeah. In that instance, there is a little bit of a loophole in the sense that if a shark is deemed to be basically for animal welfare reasons, they're allowed to euthanize it, which is a bit of a euphemism. They're allowed to kill it. Or if there's a genuine concern for fisher safety, they can kill it. Both instances may genuinely occur, but the tricky thing is that because there's no monitoring on these shark control vessels, it's who knows what actually happens. But nonetheless, sharks are caught and they are released and they are tracked. But for 90 years, a culling program has been operating, and based on the evidence at hand, shark culling simply doesn't work when we look at beach safety.
Yeah, that was going to be my very next question. How effective are these methods of catching sharks? How effective are they at actually keeping swimmers safe?
As I said, there's no evidence that a culling program improves safety. The study in 2025 looked at netted beaches and unnetted beaches, and shark bite rates didn't differ at either beach. We also know that another study showed that an estimated 40% of sharks are caught on the beach side of a net. So these are once they've actually come in, done their thing, and gone, you know what, I'm going to head back out, and bang, they hit a net, as opposed to hitting the net when they're coming in.
These nets don't completely surround the beach either, otherwise it wouldn't work.
No. As I said,
It's really easy for them to just swim around it.
Over, under and around, yeah. And so for those who aren't familiar with, I suppose, picturing a shark net in the ocean, it's kind of like having a fly screen door, but you've only got mesh on there that's as wide as your thumb, and you're hoping to keep all the flies out. It's just not going to happen.
And with the baited hooks, that would actually attract sharks, you would think.
Potentially, yeah. So you may very well attract sharks that otherwise perhaps wouldn't have stopped by. They might have just kept going. And even with the shark nets, there's numerous images that have been sourced as a result of Freedom to Information where you can see rays with giant crescent chunks taken out of their wings, which is clearly from a shark. So again, these shark nets and drum lines can also act as dinner bells to bring larger sharks in that otherwise may not have even bothered or come past. The way I also like to put it is that Queensland's also using drones. So that these are evidence-based measures that improve safety and it come at no cost to wildlife. So you've got use of drones, as I said, the tagging and tracking of sharks. The use of those technologies also make it incredibly clear how redundant and a waste of taxpayer resources those lethal measures are, because there's no evidence to suggest that they actually improve safety. So it's far better that you have those resources into evidence-based measures that improve safety, and it makes no sense to continue them when you're already using drones and you're tagging and tracking sharks.
These shark nets, you said there's 7 target species that they actually want to euthanize, but they're catching everything else as well, aren't they? Even the harmless sharks, and not to mention the whales. Year
on year, you're getting whales getting caught, turtles, dolphins, dugongs. I don't have the exact numbers at hand, but the numbers are quite readily accessible. And when you think of these animals and what they contribute, not just to the environment, but also just to tourism, it really is a stain that the tourism industry has to wear, that whilst they're out there promoting, vibrant, wild Queensland environment and snorkeling on the reef and so forth, at the same time, you have to acknowledge that there's also devices in the water that are killing these very animals that help support a vibrant industry. Let alone, actually, I should also say, let alone cultural practices of First Nations people across Queensland as well. So, again, these nets and these drum lines don't need to be there. They serve no good. They only do damage in every sense. And taxpayer dollars can be better invested in evidence-based measures that do improve safety and come at no cost to wildlife.
Last year, the Queensland LNP government announced a new updated shark control management plan, which included additional funding for extra shark nets and drumlines on top of what they already had in new areas of the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Wide Bay and other areas. But it's come under criticism from the Federal Labor Party spokesman Tom Smith at Senate estimates this week. He said Queensland's shark control program could actually be illegal under the Commonwealth's Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. He literally said that a couple of days ago, so it's quite new. But do you believe the nets and drumlines should all be removed?
Yes, 100%. As I said earlier, they serve no purpose. They do not improve safety by any measure. I think the only comfort they provide is to politicians to seem like they're doing something. Because the general thinking is that the reluctance to remove them is because should they remove a net or a drumline and someone does unfortunately get bitten, the thinking is that politicians are actually more concerned about their opposition using that as ammunition or political ammunition against them as opposed to human safety. So, yeah, they don't need to be in the water. And look, it's a strategy that's 90 years old. In no other aspect of our life, be it the schools our kids go to, be it the workplaces we're in, would anyone accept a safety practice or an OH&S policy that's nearly a century old? People would be like, shouldn't you update this to modern safety standards? And so why would the beach be any different?
So what are the alternatives for keeping swimmers safe if we take these nets and drumlines out, hypothetically? What are the alternatives? You mentioned drones. Is there anything else?
Yeah, there's drones. The tagging and tracking of sharks enables us to understand better, well, first and foremost, provide real-time alerts as to where particularly large or dangerous sharks might be and at what beaches. But broadly, it enables us to understand better their behaviour, where they move, why they move, and when they move into certain areas. And that can relate to things that happen in the environment that could elevate that risk. So in New South Wales this year, there was a spate of shark bites that were presumably bull shark bites. And we had very high or above average levels of rainfall, above average levels of water temperature. And all these conditions are highly conducive to bull shark activity. And the tagging and tracking data is showing that when you get high levels of rainfall and storms, bull sharks love hanging out around near coastal estuaries and rivers.
Oh no, just another way that climate change is coming to get us.
Yeah, so there's tagging and tracking that gives us that information and real-time alerts. Drones, obviously, real-time alerts. There are electronic personal deterrent devices, which, for example, the WA government provides consumers rebates on those devices.
So something that you strap on your leg and it emits a signal that deters sharks.
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard of them.
Yeah, exactly. There's eco barriers, which are semi-rigid structures that are fully enclose a beach or an area from the seafloor to the surface. Again, WA has used these and then they're quite popular with swimmers. And fundamental to all that is also, really strong community education or public education service. So much like Queensland has got a Crockwise program that kids at school learn about, there's no reason why they shouldn't have a Shark Smart program at schools just the same. And kids can learn things about, things like observing bait balls or certain seasons of the year when you get, say, mullet runs and white sharks tend to follow those. There are a lot of cues and environmental signals and just general information that could really inform people about the risks that they are then willing to take when they go in the ocean.
Yeah, so what advice do you have for swimmers to stay safe in the ocean?
There's quite a few things to do, but to keep it simple, there's the classic, avoid swimming at dawn and dusk. Those low light conditions are when sharks typically favour to go on a hunt, so it works in their advantage. Where you can, swim between the flags because at the very least there's eyes on the water, and should anything happen, you can get prompt medical assistance. But obviously being eyes on the water, people can also alert you to any dangers that might exist. If you have the luxury of being able to choose what beach to swim at, probably best to swim at a patrol beach or a beach where there's drones. But look, there's quite a lot of beautiful and remote beaches in Queensland that people like because it's quiet and no one's there. Again, ask locals about the local conditions, see if there's anything been happening recently. But yeah, ultimately it's a case of understanding as best as possible that the risk is very, very low, and just some basic common sense approaches can help improve your safety.
Yeah, we often have really beautiful crystal clear visibility out here on the Great Barrier Reef. So you can see very far in the water. So if you keep your eyes open, and everyone, the lookouts, the lifeguards are keeping their eyes open, it feels really safe. So where can people head to take action and help to protect sharks and support your work?
Yeah. Well, if anyone wants to learn more about sharks and also more about their conservation and what they can do, you can simply visit marineconservation.org.au, have a look at our sharks page, and all the information's there.
Sadly, that's all we have time for today. Thanks for all your amazing work, and thanks for joining us on Word on the Reef today.
Thanks for having me on, Tanya and Brett.
And thanks to you all our listeners. We'll be back next week. Best fishers. See you next time.
Safe diving.